Welcome to Bold Strong. Today we have Kamea Lafontaine with us, a good friend.
Hey, buddy.
Welcome to the show.
It's good to see you.
Glad to have you. It's been too long.
It's been too long. What kept us apart, man?
Yeah, mostly. Well, it's COVID.
Yeah,
and
I think so.
Yeah, we're almost neighbors, actually.
Yeah.
Kind of embarrassing. I could probably stand on my roof and wave.
You don't have a home set up yet for this? Man, we should really do like an in your gym type of.
We could do it.
Live thing. That would be great.
Yeah, it is fun to come to work and just have a space that isn't home.
I agree.
We're stuck
it feels so good to just be out of the house. You know, when it first started, I got a little comfortable, I think. I was like, oh, yeah, I like staying home. Yeah. It didn't last long. Yeah. I got 4 kids. I like going out.
You see the same walls, and it's nice to get out there.
Yeah, it can kind of drive you nuts. You get this like cabin fever type of thing where you start thinking that your whole life is just planning the next Netflix show and food, and it's good to get out.
It's shocking how little we've done over the last little while. You've come over to the house twice.
I did
during COVID when we
very
thought
controversial.
COVID was done. We had protesters outside.
That's okay. We fought them off, and we had a good workout.
Yeah.
No, but it was during pockets when it was generally safe. They said it was okay. Also, you're a personal trainer, so there's another thing. It was important that we got in the gym, but I think what was interesting about all these changing sort of guidelines coming and going is that I'm kind of getting to the point where I don't think this is going to end. I thought it would end.
Yeah.
And now I'm starting to see a path forward where this is going to be a permanent reaction, and all of these systems that are being created are going to become just common.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think COVID's here to stay or what?
It's funny because you remember back in the beginning of this, I remember it was like it was yesterday. It was March 14th. And it was March 13th, actually. And suddenly there was all these restrictions, and you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that. And there was this fear. I don't know what to do. Yeah. Like, what can I do? What shouldn't I do? How bad is this? Like, at that point, it was still a matter of, is COVID passed through touch? Is it passed through the air? Is it like influenza? How bad is it? And there was a lot of unknowns. And then the other big thought, like you said, was it's probably going to be, 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
Yeah,
it's
tops.
It's not going to be a big deal. Like, it's pretty much going to be over. And then, now it's starting to feel like, wow, this is never going to end.
Especially with all the data we have now, and you basically have the same options to deal with it, right? So I think it's here to stay. I'm getting comfortable with the fact that this is just how our lives are going to be. Yeah. And you know what? I knew you were taking all the proper precautions and everything, so I felt pretty comfortable because for me, generally, I just don't like taking unnecessary risks. I don't go skydiving. I don't do a lot of crazy things. But
and you have a kind of a kid at risk, if
absolutely.
It's okay to say so.
Absolutely. I mean, we're very, and then we also have like my mother-in-law. She lives with us, and so like there's a lot of reasons why I feel it's important to be smart. And not carry this unnecessary risk. I'm just not the type to go to concerts too. Like I'm a little bit of an introvert, so I'm not out there trying to live my best life and share it on Instagram. So it didn't really bother me that much. Yeah. It's just getting used to this new idea that we may have vaccine passports. Traveling will be completely different from now on. I don't know. I do get a little bit worried about the conspiracies and how this could really become a control center for governments, just because I'm generally not a big fan of governments deciding a lot of things in our lives. And so when I saw that this whole thing was moving in that direction, the conspiracy theorists are funny, but at the same time, sometimes they're onto something, and you can't just say it's either or, right? Like sometimes there's some merit to what they're saying. And I think that's where, because of the polarization on Facebook and social media and everything, they often just get cast to the side as if what they're saying has zero merit. And it's like, you should read a little bit and think a little harder about it. And you come to realize, while the end result that they're saying is going to happen is unlikely, it always has to start somewhere. And it always seems unlikely at first.
Yeah. I think one of the, in looking at conspiracy theories over time, and I'm not a kid.
Now we're getting into it. This is what I came for. Yeah. Okay, let's go.
Like, I think one of the interesting things about conspiracy theorists is that they have sometimes these all or nothing sort of mentalities where it's
Sure.
like, this is the worst case scenario and we're trying to kill all the people on the planet. Well, whose goal would it be to kill all people? Like, no one's going to have that goal. Economically, you destroy society by wiping out massive parts of populations.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, sometimes you just have to follow the money. Like, where does it make sense to wipe out everyone in Alberta? You know, where
Right.
does it make sense to, like, sometimes you just have to step back and say, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, maybe there is some element where we're just saying, look, if you're not going to get the vaccine and you die, then, hey, life sucks.
Well, let's go back up for a second. What are the vaccine conspiracies right now?
So, well, firstly, we also have the COVID conspiracies themselves, that it's a man-made possibility, which I don't know. I don't know if anyone knows. Maybe Fauci knows. I don't know. People have taken swings at Fauci.
Okay.
And that it was developed by China, possibly for some purpose, a biological purpose. It was developed by governments to do a population reset that comes up once in a while as a conspiracy theory. Then, and there's probably plenty of others. And then the vaccine ones. I remember early on people talked to. There was a joke about the 5G that this COVID possibly there was some tie to 5G, and then everyone
got activated by 5G.
Yeah, and everyone got the vaccine, and the joke on the phone was like, "Man, I'm getting way better cell coverage now." And then I got the AstraZeneca, so I'm only getting 3G coverage on my phone now.
Sure,
it's terrible, and so maybe there's a conspiracy about is maybe the big drug companies are just making bank on this, and they certainly are making more money, right?
Yeah,
of course, and but there's risk too. When you sell drugs, there's massive amounts of risk. And there's lawsuits in the future. There's a lot of conspiracies.
Not really.
Well,
they do have that clause where basically they can't get sued.
But Pfizer had that multi-billion-dollar criminal claim a few years ago for I forget what it was, but it was a big deal.
Yeah, some other drug.
Criminal.
Yeah.
So yeah, you might be right, but they can't get sued now. But who knows? There's a lot of conspiracies.
Well, I want to go back to the word conspiracy for a minute because Ryan Holiday wrote a book called Conspiracy in which he told the story of Peter Thiel backing the lawyer who backed Hulk Hogan during the whole Gawker sex tape incident. And what I thought was really interesting about that is when he talked about conspiracy, so there's this thing that Peter Thiel asks people before he'll hire them. It's like, what's something that you believe that most people don't believe? He's looking for independent thinkers, essentially.
Yeah.
And one thing that Ryan Holiday argues is that we should have more conspiracies. We should actually be conspiring for good things. Let's conspire to stop COVID. Let's conspire to make Alberta more successful. And so when we put a solely negative connotation on conspiracy, we forget to work together on stuff. And so after I read that, I saw the whole story of the Hulk Hogan, trial work out, and then Gawker eventually filed for bankruptcy because they got sued into oblivion. There is a place in the world where we should conspire. I really do believe that. And I think the fact that everyone thinks they're so transparent and they're so honest and they're so noble, being on Facebook, being a social justice warrior, I don't think that's good enough. I really do think that good people need to get together and make good plans and have experience, and there needs to be experts there, and everyone needs to actually come up with a conspiracy on how to do good things.
Yeah.
So, I get a little bit concerned when people just brush off conspiracy theorists, because if you do look at some of the things they're saying, while the outcome might look extreme, I think they're doing that for theater purposes. They're trying to make a point. They're trying to fear us into at least looking at the information. There's some truth to it, man. I really do think that they are talking about things that, sometimes they're government documents they're referencing. And if you read it, you go, oh. For example, there was this one organization in the U.S. called DARPA, and they're basically the research arm of the U.S. government. And they actually have done tons of research on something called network narratives. So how to develop and seed an agenda, how to get people talking about something. And I guarantee you those same kind of research principles were used during COVID to get us to all say the same thing, social distancing. I had never used this word before prior to COVID.
It's a very human human studies thing that I studied in school back a long, long time ago. But
mimetic theory, right? You know, if you break down society's smallest unit of consumable content, it's a meme. It's a very simple idea that can be transferred from one person to another. And so the government uses these ideas to get us to believe and to parrot certain phrases, you know, keep everyone safe. They got this other one at the government level, build back better. You know, these are just common marketing tactics that they use to try and get us psychologically to buy into an idea. Because they're really simple to remember. And so just on the conspiracy tip, you know, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I wouldn't say I'm a conspiracy theorist, but I love looking into this stuff, man. I love reading about it because I'd rather know what the heck they're thinking than just ignore it altogether and say, I'm not even going to look into it.
So what do you think about those aliens?
Well,
because that became a big conspiracy theory recently too, where, you know, they're going to release all the documents. And it's
why now, though?
Away.
That's what I'm wondering. Like, why come out with this during COVID?
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe we were all distracted and it was a convenient time.
Yeah. You know what I was mentioning?
That's why the government comes out with their news on Sunday. Because we're not paying attention. Yeah, anyway, just a side note.
It was interesting. I was saying to someone the other day, it's like, you know, we talk so much interest about COVID, of course, because it's it's what causes us to wear masks today, and we're behaving a certain way almost exclusively because of this one very identifiable virus. But if I go to the hospital today and I have a big cut on my hand, first thing they say is, when was the last time you had a tetanus shot? And then I just say, oh, it's been a while. I don't even know. Okay, here you go. Smack. What's in that? Like, I've probably had 20 tetanus shots in my life. Never once asked what is in that. Could be horse urine for all I know. Could be nothing.
I agree. This is kind of where I'm going with my thinking is, where do we stop then? What's the bad viruses and what are the good ones? Because if we're going to ask about COVID, then why wouldn't they want to eventually ask about other things? Because I thought other viruses were bad too. So it does naturally lead you down that path. And I think that's where the conspiracy theorists kind of have a little bit of merit, where they're like, what if? And if no one's asking what if, what are we really doing? We're just sheep, just, you know, kind of going wherever we're led without questioning anything. And I think by definition, unreasonable people change the world. Because people who are reasonable never change anything. They just go along with what they're told. So, and I think you've seen this a lot in business. You know, you do have to take risks that most people would find unreasonable. Right?
Yeah. It's almost a definition of business owners and leaders, right? Is doing things that don't make sense sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think just as long as we're cautious about, you know, like, there's stop signs so that we don't plow into each other. There's seatbelt laws so we reduce risk. You know, like there's things that we have stopped questioning at some levels, and we just do now. And, you know, you still got to question stuff, but not to a point where it's like paralyzing us. I saw a meme the other day where it's like, unless I could pop it up on a screen, but it was a guy at a computer and his wife had just walked by and she was kind of going around the corner and he says, honey, come see what I found. I found some information on the internet that all the scientists and professionals haven't noticed yet. Okay. All right, here we go. You know, and it's like, okay. And as long as we don't get so far down the rabbit hole that we can't think intelligently, and it gets us to stop doing something, you know?
No, I agree with you. You know, I'm not an expert on vaccines. I'm smart, but I'm not a vaccine expert. So I can't sit here and assume that somehow I'm going to be able to navigate this any better than they would. And they have all the information that I don't. So here we are. What am I supposed to do? Just rely on my own understanding of everything. And that actually brings up a really interesting societal problem that we're in right now, in that because nobody trusts anybody anymore, and everybody has access to all this information, the arguments are now starting to get more and more emotional and more superstitious. So it's almost like because we have all this information, we're just starting to believe ourselves. And the voice we listen to is in our own head. And that's a dangerous future, man.
Yeah.
This doesn't look good if we have no experts.
Yeah. There's been a couple occasions where I've talked to people who have worked in talk radio. And when you listen to talk radio can become incredibly controversial.
Sure.
And you're more or less throwing out stuff that's on the edge because you want people to call in and be wound up, like hot, And the reason you do it isn't because it's right or wrong. It's because it's entertainment. And you need people on the radio. And I think what, like even, doing a podcast, if we can do something controversial,
right,
then people tune in, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
If I just say, no, this is good, everything's good, happy day, and it's 22 degrees outside, have a nice day, nobody's going to watch that podcast.
Yeah, well, nobody reports all the planes that landed safely. Only the ones that crashed.
Exactly.
So this is actually at the root of what's wrong with social media. So everybody talks about artificial intelligence and all of these amazing things that it can do. Man, these algorithms are broken simply because the triggers that they use are very crude. So think about it. It's how many clicks you did, how much time you spent looking at something. And so what we're essentially doing is we're tapping into this lizard brain, this very raw emotion.
The animal
in all of us. And so that essentially is what drives what we see. If we feel that something turns us on, man, we're going to see more of it. If something got us excited because it's super controversial, we're going to see more of it. And so social media as a medium is broken because of that. You can't be reasonable because no one's going to look at it anyway.
Yeah. It was, I forget, I think it was Ari Shafir, the comedian, who he just ran a laptop one time and just did nothing but cat searches on the computer. and guess what he got back? Nothing but cat results.
Sure. And we think AI is so intelligent. It's really not. It is feeding off of the feedback loop we give it.
Yeah, that's right.
And I just think social media is dangerous for that reason, is that we're really using our fight or flight response to train the algorithm itself.
Yeah. I guess one of your other interesting topics that is rolling around in your brain, I understand, is, when we look at generations, and we today have a generation, like my kids, probably, I don't know if your kids do it, but my kids are glued to their screens. Like
all day.
From the second they get up to the second, maybe even after they're sound asleep, it's going and going, and TikTok is like, we're back to these unbelievably short sound bites, and those sound bites are getting feedback. Do you want more? Do you want less? And and it's shocking. And when we think of older generations, we certainly didn't have that. We had something different where we had television, and television drove, and even newspapers. Like a newspaper, if people remember what those were back in the old days, that could have driven social thinking. But now it's like, I don't even know how you stay on top of things with these 7-second sound bites.
Well, before we talk about the current generation, I think it's important to go back and to understand why there's such disdain for boomers, right? So personally,
boomers are the generation that was essentially caused by World War II ending.
Yep.
And and it's not as simple as just saying there was just more kids born. There was massive economic changes,
cultural changes.
Yeah, companies that had previous to World War II had shifted from building cars to tanks, had to shift from tanks to cars. GE blew up and turned it
diaper sales were out of control.
Yeah, German companies that had created chemical warfare products had turned into selling aspirin and headache medicines now, and creating cassette tapes. And so it was a massive industrial change that was going on too.
Yep.
And what's interesting too is that other countries like China, they were significantly repressed, I guess. I don't know what the exact word is, but they weren't anywhere close to what they are now.
Right.
Very, very different environment. And Europe was, beat to shit, really. It was just potholes.
Yeah.
There was a huge rebuilding. Anyways, so the boomers come out of that, and they see this world of possibly hope, and and the other thing that comes, as the boomers are just getting into it, is this concept that, because going into World War II, the U.S. and really, the U.S. drives a lot of generational theory.
Right.
The U.S. became protectionist, and they didn't want to enter World War II at all, and only did partly because they were provoked, and then secondly because they were begged, and then they changed the tide of the war, and it really changed the American industrial environment, really.
Right.
But up until that point, the U.S. was happy just being the U.S. and just saying, "Hey, you guys have your problems over there.
Right.
Stick with it, and we're not going to be involved." But then now you look at the post World War II situation, and suddenly we're Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iran. There's Bosnia. We're kind of just poking everything now.
Right.
So.
Yeah, well, before we jump into the boomers, then let's go back to because I think this is really relevant to what's going on today with what happened with Afghanistan and what's continuing to happen. So during that period of time, like look at the Vietnam War, for example. There's a book that was written by a social psychologist, Becker, and it's called The Denial of Death. And in there, I think there's a really important concept where he talks about how everything humans do is really just to try and transcend their fear of death, to try and live forever, to transcend this concept that we're just going to die and then there's nothing. And that translates into how we adopt religion and how we adopt wars and how we basically live our lives in a way to justify why we do what we do as being better.
It sounds a little like it comes out of the Hobbesian Thinking Leviathan book.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It comes a little bit off of that.
And so the U.S., if you go back to sort of some of the perspectives on why they left Vietnam, one of them, there was an actual document that I took a look at, and 70% of the reason was just to avoid sheer embarrassment. There's a posture politically and militarily that they want to have in the world, and leaving would have undermined that. And if you take a look at what's happening now, the Republicans kind of didn't want this to ever end. They would say it, but they wouldn't pull the trigger. And so with this whole exit from Afghanistan, in some ways, Joe Biden has gone against this whole narrative that we should stay there forever. And at first I was like, whoa, this is super dangerous. What's going on? You leave, and then a few days later, they're back in business and running the whole show. But I think what he did, believe it or not, might actually be the right thing looking back in history. All these little details will work themselves out, but in the future, he still is going to be the president who governed over the exit and the end of the 20-year Afghanistan war.
Yeah. I think where he's going to be most criticized is the how.
Yeah, of course. But the how isn't what historians care about.
Not generally.
It's like what happened, and he did end it. So I think this kind of goes in the face of a lot of people who want to maintain this idea that America and the West is just this powerhouse. But let's take a look at reality. So the 3D printing concept is kind of a side note, but it helps to make the point. This 3D printing revolution was supposed to take off, but it didn't. Why? Because China is our 3D printer. They do everything better, faster, cheaper than we ever could. So why would we do it ourselves at a higher cost when we could get China to produce it for us? Yeah. And this whole concept that China produces cheap, stuff, this is really just the West coping with the fact that they're not as good at manufacturing.
Yeah, they're just massively efficient.
Try and manufacture an iPhone here. See how much your iPhones cost. It'll cost like $5,000 for your phone. Yeah. You're not going to do it.
Efficient there.
Yeah, and you were talking a little bit about, other countries like Mexico where the same thing. You have this idea that your way of life is the best, and then you try to push it on everyone else. And that's where I think people are calling in the chips for the U.S. and saying, okay, well, this doesn't sound like what you said it was anymore.
Yeah, part of the U.S. challenge seems to me to be, this is me talking big politics, but
sure,
was the U.S. in a war against Afghanistan, or was it the United Nations in a war against Afghanistan? But every time you hear the U.S. talk about it, it's like, we won the war. It's like,
right.
Hold on, didn't you represent the United Nations? You're just one of the participants. And every time the U.S. acts like they're the only one that matters, they just get a bad rap for it. And
Right.
they should, like Biden should have just said, look, the UN needed to get out of Afghanistan. We're just one of many. Everyone got out. It wasn't just them. Everyone got out.
Yep.
But then it's painted in the picture of the U.S. pulled out, and the U.S. did this, and the U.S. gave the Taliban all the weapons. But it was the UN, and they should have gone to the UN and said, look, we need a thumbs up
Right.
to move out of this. And then he would have taken way less heat.
Right. But I think that's why it's so fascinating to think about these narratives that get formed around a country's military strategy or political strategy. Think of like 9/11, right? And you think of the justification for starting the war in the first place, right? The justification for the Patriot Act, the justification for killing Osama bin Laden. Whoever gets to decide what's true gets to decide what justifies violence.
Yeah.
Every law that we live by, whether it be here in Calgary or anywhere else, is basically underwritten by violence.
Yeah,
like
right.
try to do this
Shapiro
thought
says
exercise.
that all the time.
You know, you go through, you jaywalk, and then you resist.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to get a ticket. Well, don't pay the ticket. Then what's going to happen? Well, the fine's going to increase. Okay, then what happens? Next time you get pulled over.
Tasered.
You might get tasered. Eventually, you end up with violence.
Yeah,
is basically the whole logic behind it. And so that's why it's so important that now with the internet, right? And we're just starting to get a taste for what this feels like. All of history now has a bunch of voices. Like your children posting on social media, believe it or not, are going to become a part of writing history.
Yeah.
Whether it's through their opinions or through their viral videos or through its YouTube or whatever, podcasting, they are going to help write history now. And this is one of the hardest things for a government to control, right? Think about Germany back in the day. They used to send out radios with the church so that everybody would hear the same thing.
Yeah.
And this goes right back
With
to
one
the whole
station.
With
and
one
it was
station.
illegal to listen to any other station.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the first thing you have to do is get alignment on the message, on the narrative, and then you can go from there. But if you don't, it's just total chaos. And this is where I think China really has a strategy that is just going to work better than America or the West, where they have literally taken full control of the narrative. It's to the point now where they're actually limiting the effect that influencers can have on their children.
Right.
They're limiting video games to 3 hours
That's
per
right.
week.
I saw that.
Right?
Yeah.
So why is this important to watch? Well, we live in the West. We can say whatever we want. We love it. However, we also deal with the consequences of that as well. The confusion, the fighting, the division, you know, the anger. We become less productive as we all just sit here and argue with each other. Meanwhile, well, China has the best manufacturing in the world. They are a growing military power. They basically are kind of the new world superpower, but the West doesn't want to admit it.
Yeah. And I guess it's tough because then you have to layer in is it better to live in China or you're not
Bro, are we
going
going to get like canceled on YouTube for this?
We're not moving to
Are we
China.
allowed to speak? Yeah. I don't know. I feel like we're going off and saying words that are not allowed.
Yeah, maybe. We'll have to like bleep out some. But you know, there's a social scientist. His name is Gwyn Dyer, and really fascinating guy, smart guy. And he's got a video called I can't remember the video name. How convenient. I'll put it in the notes later.
Sure.
But he talks about throughout history as you see the implementation of printing, the printing press, and the dissemination of information broadly. That opens the door to basically any kind of democracy.
Right.
And so democracy seems to be hinged on the availability of information and sharing of ideas. And as soon as you unshare, then suddenly, the likelihood of there being a true democracy starts to dissipate.
That's right. That's right. And during this election cycle, I thought it was really fascinating that the president of the United States got kicked off Twitter, but the Taliban still had Twitter accounts and they were able to speak. What I thought was really interesting, I believe it was one of the countries in Africa, or they basically banned Twitter. I don't know if it was Nigeria or where, but they kicked Twitter out because Twitter tried to censor their leader.
Wow.
And so, we're kind of living through this battle of, do we let a technocracy own our voice and decide what we can and can't think or say? Or do we allow the government to kind of decide that? Which is why I was so opposed to Bill C-10, So here in Canada, they were going to give more powers to the CRTC to decide what was best for Canadians to see. Now, their rationalization was we need to see more Canadian voices. So honestly, it would have been good for your podcast because you would be seen more.
Have to watch it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. because you're going to be elevated in the YouTube algorithm. The CRTC gets to decide what kind of Netflix shows are more prominent and all that stuff. And the problem, again, is that who's in charge? Like, who gets to decide what is right for me to see and what's not? And this has a lot of implications, especially when you start thinking from an Indigenous people context, right? Like, look at the 215 kids that were found in Kamloops. And then I was just in Kawasis recently, a First Nation, and we walked the grave sites with the chief. And the Catholic Church and the Canadian government wants a certain narrative to be spun. This is unwinding that. This is opening up a whole new can of worms for them to deal with. And it's incredibly difficult to keep everybody loving all of your decisions when this is the new history that's starting to emerge with new data, right? So again, just going back to network narratives, this is why it's so important that we watch who's controlling narratives and what's being said, and why, personally, I don't really like sharing all these thoughts publicly, but honestly, it gets to the point where if you don't speak and you don't say anything, you don't have these conversations, it's going to happen anyway around you, and you're just going to be forced into it.
Yeah, I sometimes I think too about the kids.
About the kids. Okay, let's go back to the boomers, because I personally think the boomers kind of ruined the world we now live in. And
not all of them, just in case some of them are listening.
Oh, I'm okay with it because I'm talking to them as a generation. Like, my parents are boomers, right? I love my parents. But the ideals that they brought into this world, they're not revolutionaries. They're consumers. They were raised on television. And what's distinct about the baby boomer upbringing is they were in lockstep. Talk about narratives being the same. There were only a few channels you could watch, right? There was newspapers. They all said the same thing. There was like complete command control because at the time, new companies were starting. They were selling a ton of product. I think it went from America having 4,000 TVs to like 19 million, like very quickly.
Overnight,
So when you have that kind of scale of message and everyone has to watch the same thing, this is what makes boomers distinct, is that they were all raised with the same ideas.
Yeah.
And so they brought all of that into the institutions that they eventually began to run. They brought all those ideas into politics. There's a guy who works with Robert Kiyosaki, and he teaches, kind of stock trading and stuff like that. And he says, if you want to tell the future, look at demographics and policy. And the demographics of the baby boomers literally just set the stage for how everything is working now. And at the tail end of their life, they're really just out here trying to protect their 401ks, their RSPs, the stock market, literally anything that they have that is their wealth. All these policies are built to protect it. And I think that's one of the most shameful things about the baby boomers is that they're literally leaving us with a worse world, and they're trying to get all the meat off the bone before they retire and leave us with all these problems. And there was an old wise saying, I don't know who said it, but you want to plant trees that will produce shade that you'll never enjoy. That's the sign. Oh, you said, okay. So Craig Nadeau said this.
I must have said it at some point.
So it's a sign of a healthy society that we look to the future and say, well, let's invest for the kids. Let's do something that will benefit them but won't benefit us. This is the antithesis to what the baby boomers do. They literally do everything for themselves. They are protective of everything they own. There was even like an old marketing line that said, whoever has the most stuff wins. Right? This is the mentality that they were brought up with. And as they sort of evolved over time, there are a lot of boomers who are realizing they don't like the world they created. They don't even like the kids they created. So now we're sitting here in this like intergenerational wealth transfer shift. And, whose fault is it? It's the boomers.
Yeah. We probably all have some of fault.
I know that's extreme language, similar to what we were talking about with conspiracy theorists, but, let's just break it down, right? So we have the stock market bubble. Who created that? We have the housing bubble. It was funny. I was just looking at houses, and that's where I saw you on a motorbike. You were cruising around like Tom Cruise. So we're looking at houses and look at the houses that the boomers built, right? Nobody wants to, like, who wants 1 acre, 2 acres, 3 bedrooms, massive property? Like, who's going to buy this?
Yeah.
You know, the next generation maybe has 1 kid, maybe 2.
Yeah.
They're not into this kind of thing. And so all of these houses are going to come on the market, and they're going to get absolutely destroyed.
Yeah.
The housing market, the education bubble, right? Tenure, this whole concept of protecting the institutions, right? And they cause this education bubble where our kids now try to go to college and they can't afford it. It's too expensive, right? I was looking at some of the prices of stuff. So the economy, they ruined this too. The prices of stuff has gone up so ridiculously. They sit there and go, well, you just got to work harder. What? I was talking, so as you know, I'm a dentist. And I talk sometimes with some of my older counterparts, typically boomers, and I ask them, look, do you have any advice for me? If you were to start a dental practice today, what would you do? Would you do anything differently? And without fail, they all say the same thing. Nah, you just set up. The patients will come.
Yeah.
You'll be fine. Just treat the patient well and you'll be fine. And I'm sitting there like.
No different. Just.
Really?
Yeah.
They don't understand the world that they created for us. And now they're sitting there facing the music and trying to give their children advice. This is why Robert Kiyosaki wrote his book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is to show how that advice doesn't apply anymore.
Right.
Go to school, get a job, buy a house, take out a mortgage. Like, these things don't work the same way for this generation as it did for them. But they're geniuses because it worked for them. Simply by existing, literally anything they touched went up. Yeah. Whether it be a stock, whether it be a house, you know, they're not geniuses. They just rode the wave of the consumer revolution where everything just went up in price. And now they're winning. They own everything, Craig.
When you look at those big things, you look at, do you buy a house or you're going to rent? Do you go and get a higher level education? And if you are going to work, how do you work? Like, some of those kind of foundational things have dramatically morphed, right? Like, the houses, when my parents bought a house, I think their first house was like $6,000. You know, like, that's the garage door on most people's houses, right? And then
the single biggest investment we ever make in our life, and it's out of reach for my generation.
Our kids may never own houses at this point. And even the cheapest house is out of reach for most people.
That's why the UN has this new kind of concept where, you know, in the future, you'll own nothing. And you'll be happy.
I saw that, yeah. Education's been really interesting, too. Candace Owens goes on it's kind of worth watching what she says about education.
Right.
She's like, it's ridiculous. You just pull out of it. It's pointless at this point. Everyone's going out and getting meaningless degrees that you know, you're going to get. And, like, the cost of education, people don't know. You should take a look. I think when I went to school, like, a semester was like, it was probably $1,500.
Right.
Right now, people are coming out of school with $200,000 and more debt and into jobs that pay 30, 40, 50 grand. Like, they're not going to pay off that debt.
Nope.
They're barely going to have enough to survive. They're not going to be able to own a house. It's just everything's
You watch. They're
gonna
introduce 50 to 70 year mortgages at some point. They're just gonna have to keep pushing the limit because there's no other option. And not only that, it's actually the same thing in my industry. So corporate started buying up all of the dental practices, and it just fundamentally changed the way that we do business together. So when you're trying to buy a practice, you're not up against other dentists. You're up against venture capital money. We can't win.
Right.
Literally, and it's not even like we couldn't take out a bigger loan. The bank won't loan it. The cash flow from most of these clinics won't pay for the debt.
Wow.
So they just won't give you the money. So you're priced out of buying the assets that the boomers now hold, right? They're just sitting there, just slowly waiting for retirement, and then they're trying to maximize what they can get out of it while they're screwing the next generation of dentists.
Wow.
So we're now entering a world where the same thing is happening in housing. Right? Now you have venture capital money purchasing houses that they're renting out to the next generation. So you're not now competing with regular, middle-class families for a home. You're competing with venture capital money.
Right.
Open Door, look it up. Like, they're buying your houses at a premium. So they can package them all up, make a nice little, 11% return for their shareholders, and screwing the next generation in the process. So, like, who created all these problems? Who created all these policies that led us to this place? you can always trace it back to some sort of boomer idea, some sort of boomer policy, because they have to maintain the prices of houses because that is the retirement plan for 99% of boomers.
That's right.
If you destroy the price of the house, they can't retire. The problem is there's this sneaky little tax called inflation.
Yeah.
And the CPI numbers that have come out, and the inflation numbers in Canada alone was like, I think it was like 3 point something, 3.2, 3.5.
It was high.
In the US, it was 5 point something. So I'm a little suspicious about what Canada's numbers and how they calculated that. But just go to the store, buy some underarm deodorant, and it's like $8. It used to be like $5, $4. Bananas. Like everything we buy is just skyrocketed in price. I saw some memes where it shows the toilet paper rolls, same price or just a little higher, but then they reduce the amount of tissue
There's
that you
there's
actually
a
get.
concept for that. I forget what the technical term is for that. But there is a term where
capitalism?
things get smaller, and then they say, look, I'm giving you less pop because firstly, it's good for you.
Right.
And you'll lose weight now and you'll be healthier, but it's going to cost the same.
Yeah.
And if you want a bigger one, it's going to cost more.
So I mean, if we need to continue to make the case of why boomers are the worst generation in the world, I'm happy to keep going. But what's really interesting to me is what the next generation is starting to do in response to that.
Which is?
Okay.
Which generation are we talking about?
Gen X, millennials, and younger, right? So number one, let's just talk about money in general, right? So a boomer policy is print forever. They don't have any new ideas. This is just keep borrowing money, keep using debt. I paid off my debt. Why can't you pay off your debt?
Yeah, it's the Keynesian policy of economics.
Right. And so if you look at COVID, for example, we went from some really low number relatively to like $300 billion in debt here in Canada. And it just keeps going up like crazy. We'll never pay off this deficit.
No.
Ever. And so this whole idea that we're going to be able to pay off debt, it's not real anymore. And so the next generation has said, well, if the money's broken, well, what do we do? So in 2008, after the housing crash, there was this Bitcoin thing that came out of that. And it's new money that can't get inflated by any government in the world.
Right. There's no monetary policy on it.
There's no monetary policy. It's locked in code, which we believe in. And it just operates decentralized. And so we can actually transact in this money, and we know it's going to hold its value over time. And that's generally been true for the last 11 years that it's been available. So the whole idea of cryptocurrency is, if you take a look at the separation of church and state, think of this now as the separation of money and state. And this revolution started even before 2008. Once we had video games, and my kids love playing things like Roblox and Fortnite or whatever. In that game, they have an in-game currency.
Right.
And they transact in it all the time. They buy skins, they buy special little features, they buy levels, whatever. Once you make that a cryptocurrency, though, that's where things really start to get crazy. Because imagine your kid earning while he's playing. So the next generation is being revolutionaries, and they're saying we're done with that system. We're done saving money. We're done pretending like our boomer advice that we got was any good. And we're just going to go try something new. And people don't like it because it's wild. It's like the Wild West. Things come and go, ton of volatility, a lot of scams, things like that. But hey, at least we have something else that we can use to exit the system. So the real solution here is to just exit boomer policies, exit boomer systems, and use other systems.
Did you hear that El Salvador I think
legalized
it was yesterday
Bitcoin?
Or today did Bitcoin?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
so
crazy.
and going back to what you were saying before about how Mexico would create a lot of this stuff, manufacturing wise, inflation, because they actually use the U.S. dollar as their currency. They lost their currency in some civil war or whatever. And so when they adopted Bitcoin, it's because inflation is not evenly distributed across the world. When the U.S. does its thing and Canada does its thing, all these third world countries get screwed along the way.
Yeah, that's right.
So I remember my grandmother, she worked in a market in Tonga. And when she was there, she would sit there with all of her taro and potatoes and things that she grew. And she would go sell it at the market and sit there all day long in the sun to sell some of this stuff. And they pay with U.S. dollars sometimes. So if it's being deflated in the West, it's really being deflated in those third world countries. So this whole notion of these policies being generally good for the world, even countries, third world countries, are starting to see like we don't want to be under the economic thumb of the West. Mm-hmm. We don't want their monetary policy ruining our future. And so they're willing to take the big leap and take the risk to try this currency that's been around for 10 years only. Right. Right? And so in response to that, the next generation is saying, okay, let's deal with money first. All right, we're going to create our own money. And it's going to appreciate in value. It's not going to be devalued like your boomer money. Mm-hmm. This whole concept on the blockchain is just think of it like programmable money. If you could put a little game theory and a little bit of code inside of your dollar, that's all this stuff is. And so when you compare boomer money, which is, here's how the money works. We use it until we need to print more, and then we just print it unlimited. Just click a button, and we'll print a lot more. Bitcoins is the exact opposite. There's 21 million. There will never be any more than that. Get it while you can. So we're shifting over, and this is what screwed up the boomers' gold strategy. Think about it. Gold typically is a hedge for all this chaos in the world. Yeah. It was not a hedge this time. Nope. It went down. Yeah. It's a really bad performing asset. Yeah. In the last 10 years, you'd be better off buying a lot of different things other than gold. And this is coming from somebody who in dental school bought a bunch of silver bars. Like I was freaked out for the future. I was a guy who was like, I don't know what's going to happen. I thought the market was going to crash, and I waited.
Has silver gone up in 20 years?
No.
It's the same, isn't it?
Yeah. It sucks. And so I'm looking at this going, I thought this gold precious metal thing would work. Yeah. Even that broke. Yep. And so I'm sitting here going, okay, I'm waiting for a stock market crash, and I waited for 12 years. Mm-hmm. Because even historically, every 7 to 8 years, there's this market cycle, and it crashes, and then it slowly builds back up. We've only had V-bottoms, bro. There are no more crashes. Now it's just like anti-gravity money policy.
You know what's interesting about crashes is, like they sound terrible, right? If you don't own any stocks, what impact does it have on you?
Oh,
if
my
you don't
gosh.
own a single
None.
stock, zero, right? So
you love crashes, and I was waiting the whole time.
If you're Bill Gates or if you're someone whose their entire portfolio is based on stock values, then it matters. But for like my kids don't.
What generation are they? Oh yeah,
exactly.
That's right. Yeah.
So like if you don't have investment, and I was listening to the radio this morning too, and they're okay. We have the business report, and what they talk about the Dow Jones Industrial and the New York Stock Exchange rates, and it's like, how disconnected are you from normal people? Like normal people don't really care about the Dow Jones Industrial, nor do they even know what it is. Yeah. Right, and so. Like if the Dow Jones goes down by 30, everyone walks around, oh, you hear the Dow Jones went down by 30 today? It's like, yeah, what difference does that make?
Yeah, I hear my parents say that a lot because they have, their retirement usually in index funds that are tied to the stock market prices. And generally I've stayed away from the stock market. So going back to solutions, like how do you go against what the boomers have created? Well, number one, you choose a different economic system to participate in. And I'll fully admit it's super volatile. Like there's tons of risk. But you know what? It's when in history have we been able to exit the financial system like this? Never. Yeah. Never. This is in the last 200 years, there hasn't even been one asset class added in 200 years. Yeah. This is huge. And it's just the beginning. Actually. And so this came out of bad boomer policy. Now let's talk about houses. Okay. So my generation doesn't even expect to buy a house. And if we do, we just want a nice, small, little apartment or something. We're not going to buy them, the big 1 acre, 2 acre, huge lot, 3-bedroom, massive space. Like we just don't live that life anymore.
Maybe just a condo.
Yeah. And so we're changing our lifestyle preferences out of survival. Mm-hmm. We're saying we're just not going to get ourselves into $1 million debt or $500,000 debt. Why? Yeah. So we can... and I fight a lot of this old knowledge because I have a lot of colleagues who are like, oh, did you buy another house and all this stuff? And I'm just like, the concept of a mortgage is funny. You don't really own your house. You're just loaning money from the bank. You're essentially renting money from the bank to live there. And so this next generation is very comfortable renting. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, I don't own a house. It's fine. Yeah. So that's another thing that they're doing to combat the housing crisis that has been created because just like stocks, we're like sitting here waiting for a crash. Yeah. I've been waiting for housing prices to go down, and they just don't. They went up during COVID. Yeah. How is this even possible? So I guess in this anti-gravity, world that boomers have created, it all just goes back to they need to retire, they need to protect their bags, and they want us to buy their bags at the highest possible price so they can retire in Arizona.
You know what's an interesting, like when you look at housing economically and you go back over history of it, is...
Bro, am I sounding super negative? Like, I don't mean to be. I just...
We're gonna get on the puppies and
I think I need some, bring a dog in here.
But what's interesting is that when I was a kid, you had to have a big yard because that's where kids played. Right? But today, kids are in soccer, baseball, they're at the fitness centers, and you can live in a condo and it's fine because you don't need the big backyard. So that's fundamentally changed housing and what you actually need. And, if you have a 2-acre lot, all you're going to be doing is mowing it.
All day.
Right? And what's the point of that? The other thing that's interesting about housing is, if you go back to, and this would, certainly would be maybe a North American experience, but there was a point in like the early 90s, the interest rates for mortgages were 15, 16%. But so that's here, the value of the house, like you could buy a normal house that a normal family could live in for like $70,000.
Right.
Then the interest rate went down, but then suddenly the bank was lending against $1 million house at 4%. But did the bank make any less money over 25 years?
No.
Maybe not, actually, which is interesting. So
yeah, they just keep adjusting the numbers. So so that's the real estate play for the next generation is they're just going to play a different game.
Yeah.
And they're going to let the demand wane on real estate and force the boomers to just let go of their houses for cheaper. And so that's a lifestyle change that we're adjusting to in order to accommodate for this. So let's talk about education now. Mm-hmm. So typical boomer advice, get an education, and, I know I sound hypocritical here, but follow me through this logic here. So get a good job, work your way up through the company, buy a has, have kids, retire. Education has become this business that has become so oh my goodness, the prices are so high. This next generation has to basically become slaves to debt in order to educate themselves. So what do? Well, I don't know if you've seen what Apple and Google are doing now. They actually have micro-credentialing where you can get 6-month certificate and actually have the skills that they need in order to function in their company. We're also looking at alternative forms of education like online learning. Just going to YouTube. I learned so much stuff from YouTube. So this next generation has basically said, with the exception of like specialties where you need, they're regulated, where you need a license to practice or to do the job, you don't need a degree. Yeah. You can go out there and actually figure this out on your own. Even the whole concept of an unpaid internship was a boomer problem. Like back in those days, you could raise a family working at a supermarket or at a fast food restaurant. Now you can't. So we have to actually work for free to get the experience we need to get the real job that we want. And so as far as training, education, certifications, all that stuff, self-education is like a big deal that we're fully embracing and saying, we're just going to exit the whole university system, which really is just a lot of social signaling that I have a degree. But, if you ask, Peter Thiel, head of Palantir, and he's one of the earliest investors in Facebook, he just feels like people with degrees don't get it. MBAs don't get it. Same thing with Elon Musk. He's like, he's hiring these super brilliant people with degrees, but they can't function in the real world. Right. So I know these are sweeping statements, but the point is that's what the generation that comes after is starting to react and say, no, we don't need this traditional education anymore. We'll chart our own course. Yeah. Well, and that's where you have the digital revolution that's just taking off. And this is one of the few times in history where we are ahead of the boomers, right? They don't get tech. Yeah. They're like texting like this still. Yeah. And that is our advantage right now. And we're going to run with it.
Yeah. It's what's interesting in the kind of at the micro level with COVID and education is that education has cost more every year. The inflation rate for education is quite ridiculous.
It's so ripe for disruption.
Now we've said, look, you can do virtually all of this at home, but it won't cost less.
I know.
And when you do go back, it's going to cost more.
Yeah, that was one of the most shocking things during COVID, is to watch the price. In fact, some actually dialed up, and their logic behind it was, well, it's actually harder to manage these classes
technology
online.
And cameras. And
so the price of education never went down during COVID. I didn't see everyone get a raise during COVID. So it's interesting how they just keep chiseling away at, the income streams. And if you think about the time, so this is another concept, right? Our parents just sort of worked to the bone. That was a boomer concept. You just work. My dad had 3 jobs, right? This next generation is pushing against that idea, and we're saying we don't really want to spend our whole lives working and then just be grumpy old people. So they're actually developing, sort of lifestyle businesses. They're getting online and they're actually earning money as an influencer. They're earning money as a YouTuber, and even though it's a small percentage, there are new business models that are forming around that, so that they potentially could earn some money for referring or getting more users to use a certain product or service. And so, again, just another push against the whole economic model that was created by the boomers that they want us to fully participate and engage in, because that's how they made their money. And that's how they continue to hold their wealth. If you look at the chart between the wealth held by baby boomers and millennials, the chart just diverges, and they just own everything.
Yeah.
And we're sitting here going, oh, I guess I can't afford your stuff. And that's what comes to the next problem, which is sort of their attitudes, this sort of culture that they grew up in, this sort of fake revolutionary mindset that they have, that they think their advice is so profound, right? Like they have the answers for us because what they did worked. They just got lucky.
And for a long time.
For a long time.
Like decades and decades.
Yeah. And so they just, literally just by existing, they succeeded as a whole, right? Their incomes went up, the price of their assets went up, their net worths went up. They generally lived through an era of peace. They didn't have to fight any wars. And then once they get to this like age, they start expecting the next generation to solve all the problems they caused. Look at the environmental bubble that they put us in. And now like we're stuck with all of these problems, and while we're trying to solve them, they're trying to give us advice. So this is a mindset problem that they also carry with them, is that they actually know what they're talking about. They don't. They didn't actually read. They actually went through this whole era of being told what to do, and now they're just mimicking everything that they remember from the newspapers and the television. I mean, what generation sits and watches TV all day? It's just the boomers. They're the only ones left. TVs. And that's, again, what makes them very distinct, in that they were brought up in this era of mass media with a single sort of message. But that message doesn't play out nowadays. And they're really struggling to be relevant in a day and age where we're all just realizing, sheesh, well, we got things to deal with now, just get out of our way. And they're very offended by this. They're very upset by this. I know there's a lot of boomers that are watching this right now that are mad at me. That's okay. It's just the truth.
Yeah. I think the one thing that makes me a little nervous about, as we move through our current world, is that the young people, when they look at the world, they think I'm not even a consumer, but I'm just consuming.
Right.
And that's their role, is to simply absorb everything. And then what it does is, in some ways, it sedates them from actually going out and taking advantage of the opportunity that's there. And I think that's as parents, that's probably the message. And I tell my kids every once in a while, and maybe it's part of why I even do these podcasts, is if you're going to only consume, you need to put back in.
Oof. I love this message. Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to be sedated into being nothing.
Right.
And so you need to find where the angles are to leverage off of, technology to social media or whatever, to find that future for yourself.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you're just one of gazillions of people watching TikTok today.
That's right. I think we are in what some would say is the golden age of media. Like we just have a ton of movies, ton of TV shows, like ton of options. But I agree with you that if you're not creating those things, then you really are just part of that consumer mentality that I think the boomers really have encapsulated, their entire lives. They're just constantly thinking about what they can take.
Yeah.
And so this next generation really has to come forward and propose new solutions. They have to be productive. They have to go build something, take some risks. And I tell the same thing to my kids. You can play video games, but it would be way better if you built the video game.
Built the video game.
Be on the other side of the equation, and you'll see just how powerful it really is. Because that's why wealth is concentrated so much amongst the 85 billionaires or whatever the number is today. Most of the wealth is there because they're builders. Mm-hmm. And we can hate on them, and there's obviously inequities in the tax system and the economies, but the truth is, like when Jeff Bezos was sitting there in his office with the spray painted Amazon picture that we all like to look at, I mean, nobody was jealous of him at the time. Nobody was mad at him. If anything, I bet you a lot of his friends felt sorry for him, that he was a builder. And here you have this entrepreneur, like basically spending 20 years of his life to build what is now like one of the most valuable companies in the world. Mm-hmm. $1 trillion market cap. Holy cow. And we sometimes forget that that's what we're made for. We're actually not meant to just sit around and eat all day. We're not built for, sitting around and consuming all day. We should go out and build.
Yeah. I forget who said it, and we probably shouldn't dig too deep on this one, but someone said the world largely pays you what you're worth.
Oh.
And so if you do nothing but consume other people's material,
right,
you've added nothing, and you get paid basically what you're worth.
It's generally true. I mean, is there inequality? I think so. But, if you want to really work hard and just push through it, I think the world has to give you what you're worth.
Yeah.
That's
right.
And I think a lot of this comes down to, especially as we move through different versions of the economy where it was like, you should get paid a lot to be like a coal worker. Mm-hmm. And then now, like, you look at how much some of these kids on YouTube are being paid, and you're like, whoa. Shocking how much money these guys make. And then think of cryptocurrency kids, like 19-year-old millionaires. I mean, will the world pay? But we don't appreciate that these kids are taking risks, in a very, very speculative environment, YouTube included, and they just stuck with it. One of my kids' favorite YouTubers is Mr. Beast. And I remember I watched sort of his evolution over time, and he just stuck with it.
Right.
He didn't give up. And now he's giving away millions of dollars in his videos for fun. Like he, to me, kind of represents, like, take that, boomers. Mm-hmm. I can make money being nice to people and giving them free money. Yeah. And going against these whole notions of hard work. And like he's just like, I am going to earn off of my creativity.
Right.
There's a book called The Sovereign Individual where it actually talks about this concept that in the digital revolution, those who can educate and motivate themselves will be entirely free to earn on their own terms, to generate the benefits of their own creativity.
Right.
And create their own work. That is literally what we're watching happening. This right here is creating opportunity.
Right. Yeah.
Why? Because you decided to invest, buy some equipment, press record, learn how to do this, make the audio sound decent, and start getting guests on to talk about stuff. So, people don't appreciate sort of what we've been forced into realizing and the value that's actually there. It's just like real estate back in the 60s, man. Like, it is a land grab online, and you should really get your piece.
And I guess, what's interesting about that as well is, not everyone's built for everything. And I think we all want to be Lance Armstrong and race in, Tour de France. And,
Right.
we're not, you and I aren't going to do that.
Yeah,
we're not built for it.
Yeah, I'm not.
And so not everybody's built for doing a podcast. Not everybody's built to frame a house or put shingles on a house, And so I guess in some ways, sometimes the message that these multi-million-dollar YouTubers give you is, well, that's the ideal.
Right.
Well, maybe the ideal's over here, but you got to figure it out. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
If you're not figuring out, that's where the real problem lies. You got to,
Yep.
before you're so old that you can't figure it out anymore. So.
And I do genuinely believe that the next generation is figuring it out.
Yeah.
And the boomers are trying to stop us at every point. So I'm off the boomer thing, but I just wanted to I just wanted to state my case because I think it's important that if we don't look back at history and we just believe that the next generation is causing all these problems, well, who raised them?
Yeah.
Like, where did they get these ideas from?
Yeah.
You know, you can't just absolve yourself in retirement and say, oh, I'm off to Arizona. It's not my fault anymore.
Yeah.
No. It is your fault. And, you know, I really do think they're kind of going to get away with it in some weird way. I think they're just going to die believing what they think is true.
Yeah.
And so it's up to us in this next generation to take all of these bubbles and all of these problems and fix it.
Yeah.
And to spend our lives being builders and innovators and revolutionaries so that we can make the world a better place for our kids. Will it mean that we're all going to be millionaires and we're all going to own big houses? Maybe not. Yeah. But at least we can do the work to plant the trees so that our future generations have the shade that we want them to have. Because the boomers aren't doing that.
Yeah. Here's a segue. So onto something more
That's
fun.
It? Here's the segue?
Yeah, here's a segue. Here's a, you know, back when I was 20, there wasn't personal trainers.
Yeah.
It wasn't even an industry. There was coaches. Your team had a coach. There was a coach. Like, I had coaches in university. I had a head coach for my track team. I had a jumping coach, a throwing coach, and a running coach for the events I was doing. There was no personal trainers. There was no dudes.
I know you
gym.
feel deeply about this.
Yeah. There was no dudes in the gym with 2 sizes too small T-shirts being condescending to everybody, telling them what to do. It's a new industry. It's a wildly new industry. So how was your workouts over COVID?
So I built a home gym. Best thing I ever did.
Yeah.
I was on Facebook Marketplace looking for the exact power tech equipment that I wanted.
Yep.
And I bid on it, and I won some of the things that I wanted. But anyway, yeah, I just I started focusing just on just doing it at home because I started looking at the regulations at the gym, and I'm like, I don't even want to deal with this.
Yeah.
I don't want to book an appointment. I don't have to wear a mask when I deadlift. I don't want any of it.
And you don't want to work out where someone has put down the tape.
No.
And that's it.
Like think of how gross the gym is. Right?
Yeah, it's pretty gross.
It was
it's
fine, and we still went, right? But now that they have all these restrictions, it's just like, I don't know. It just seems like, look, working out is just one of those things. I love getting under the bar, all that, but they really ruined it. And so I just found my little happy place at home, and that's exactly what I did. And I know, like, I came to your place a few times, and we worked out. I mean, I do miss that, like, not a coaching aspect, but like a friend, like, come on, let's go. You know, just the slap on the back before you try and do your lift, or that little extra push. You know, the voice in my head, it just isn't strong enough to give me that. I can't talk to myself in third person and be like, oh yeah, one more. No. But yeah, when you work out with somebody, you do get that. So that's what I miss about the gym.
Yeah, that's right.
I do genuinely miss seeing people getting inspired by the fact that they're lifting similar weight to me and I really need to pick it up, right? You just don't have a measurement of where you stand. And as men, we're a little different than women, right? So women kind of exist in this sort of network kind of existence, and men are in a pyramid. Like, as soon as you walk in a room, the guys know where you stand, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, we
Everyone's
don't
getting ranked, and
we're all getting ranked, but we're fine with it.
Yeah.
You know, and that happens in business, that happens with money, that happens with your car, that happens with everything, and we just go, I know I'm here.
I think we do it because, like, it's like, oh, Kamea's squatting more than I am. I could do that.
Yeah.
But now I would need to do these things. It's just a process of, you are squatting more than me, so that puts you over here. But I could get there.
Yeah, but that I could kind of is the competitiveness that men exist in, right? Yeah. Women, on the other hand, they kind of find their value in how many friends they have, and the network that they exist in. Their associations kind of give them their value. And then obviously, looks and, body types and all this stuff are a part of it. But I do like the gym for that reason, is that you kind of immediately walk in and know where you're at.
Yeah. You know what's shocking? I think a lot of people wouldn't get this is I've competed a couple of times, and I think if you saw every bodybuilding magazine ever with a big dude on the front, the assumption would be that this is a very male-dominated industry, and it is not. Like, all these competitions, it's probably 2/3 women and less than 1/3 men.
Right.
Less.
Really? Wow.
And it's the women who are in it, and I have a ton of respect for how much work they have to put into it, but the cost for them is higher too.
Yeah.
Because they have much more expensive equipment. They have hair and makeup that they have to deal with. Whereas men just go up there in their underwear and just like, and we're good to go.
And it's more natural, like genetically too, for us to like want to lift weights and everything like that. So, yeah, I agree. I think women have a specific challenge that they need to overcome in order to succeed in the bodybuilding world that men just feel more naturally fit to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like it probably would be a podcast of its own of just the men versus women in bodybuilding. It's really, really fascinating.
Right.
So it's
well, what about you? I think one of the issues that comes from that, though, because you've told me, bodybuilding is somewhat of a selfish sport, right? Like it's just you against the world. Like, how have you sort of crossed the chasm of accepting that and being okay with that, and then seeing how it has translated into the influencer social media economy?
Yeah, and I guess, it's an interesting thing because when, we spend so much time trying to be that good person that gives out and gives back.
Right.
But at the end of the day, look, if I want to have better handwriting, I need to pick up a pen, me, and start writing. If I want to bench press more, I have to get under the bar. I can't take that from anyone else. There's certain things that I need to do myself to be better. And there's a, incredibly selfish component to bodybuilding, but then there is, if you want to ride a bike fast, if you want to drive a car fast, if you want to do good handwriting, if you want to write songs better, like there's so much of what we do. And I think sometimes we demonize it and say, well, that bodybuilding thing's so selfish because, it's just you against the bar. And it's like, yeah, it is. But sometimes that's the only way you're going to get better. Yeah,
no, it's a single player game, right? So. Like you can't, I agree. You can't take any strength from anybody else. But when that gets leveraged then into sort of like the selling of supplements and product and personal training, where do you start to see a problem?
Yeah, and it's, I think our world in general always tries to find an angle for making an income off of stuff. And it's like just over, it would be fascinating to see some kind of study that says, look, over the last 30 years, here's the transition from there being a YMCA where almost exclusively men went to the gym. Like if you went back to our grandparents, for instance, women did not exercise, period. Like zero.
Yeah.
And then, you may have seen some odd woman ran or something, and it would be like black and white pictures and bloomers or someone swam, 50 or 60 years ago, but it wasn't, there just wasn't women. It was very socially taboo for women. And even before that, there was a taboo component of men exercising. There was even thoughts that it wasn't healthy and, in different parts of the world. So that's evolved. And now you look at just over the last, say, 20 years, if you could say how many gyms are there per capita now versus, the previous generation to the previous generation, it's shocking now. And gyms are wildly expensive. Everyone has trainers. And the amount of, there's a really interesting component here I'll get to, but the amount of information that's available for just working out, it seems like it's exploded. And suddenly we have this new information on how much protein you should eat and how many sets you should do and how many reps you should do. You've seen the book, Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding. It's
just all recycled from the past.
Every single thing on YouTube is out of that book.
Yeah.
At some point, you will find it in that book. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And nothing's new. And then someone will come up with a new exercise. Hey, I got this new way to do bench press where you only use one arm, and
Well, it's funny with all the influencers out there. Guess who I watch? It's Mike O'Hearn and Flex Wheeler. Like those videos I really like watching because they're not like fly by night, bodybuilders. They've been around for a long time, right?
Yeah, and performance enhancing drugs aside, the principle's the same.
Yeah.
If you're going to get to look, and I won't even say to get big because that's just only one component of getting to look like you want to look.
Right.
if you want to get to where you want to get to, you just have to put in the time and effort. And so, and guys like O'Hearn and, and there's lots of guys who'll just say, look, if you, what did Big Ronnie used to always say, look, everyone wants to be a bodybuilder, but
ain't
no
nobody
wants
who
to
lift no
the
heavy ass weight.
Right, exactly. So
Yeah.
so you just got to do it. And now it's created this, not only is there unbelievable numbers of gyms, but man, you can't even go to the gym now without taking a scoop of this, and a scoop of that, and and you have to have this belt and this shirt and this gloves, and it's shocking how expensive it is to work out now. Are we any further ahead? I don't know.
Well, I was watching this really old video. This Russian guy. I was looking at old books that no one wants to read anymore, and same thing with videos. And he was just saying the bodybuilder diet is the most healthy diet. Everybody should be on it. And
the long-term diet, not the one that
not the cutting before a show.
Week,
yeah, but just the general diet for maintenance and so my wife's really strict on a lot of these things, and she's just eating chicken, rice, some red meat
and
occasionally.
She's looking great now.
She's looking great, man.
It's just amazing.
And now the kids are getting into it. We have weight scales everywhere in the kitchen. I just gotta weigh my macros and start putting their food in.
Cute.
And so just seeing that that knowledge come into my house is revolutionary, because I was raised like an emotional eater, man. For me, eating was this bonding experience.
Yeah.
It wasn't to fuel my body.
Yeah.
It was to show love.
Yeah. It's a very societal thing that we do, because if I call you up one day, and I want to hang out with you, what do I say? Let's go for lunch.
Yeah.
It's not or we're going to go for a coffee and discuss something, or we're going to, go for dinner.
But what's interesting about that, there's actually a class component to it. So if there was a Baptist author who wrote this book called the Hidden Rules of Poverty. And in there, she goes through the different classes and the different question they ask about different parts of their world. So, for example, food. In the poor class, the main question is there enough? Middle class, does it taste good? Wealthy class, is it presented well?
That's interesting.
Right? And you could go down the line with education. In the poor class, this is some abstract concept. Oh, I'm going to become a doctor? I don't know. Look where I live. Yeah. In the middle class, it's this is your pathway to succeeding. You must get an education. In the wealthy class, it's all about networking and prestige.
Right.
You go to Harvard because you're going to rub shoulders with the future leaders of America. You're not going there to be educated. You can get the same education at a community college, but it's the networking. It's the prestige of going to that school. So when you break it down, I think a lot of it had to do with sort of the different classes that you grow up in, and then these different hidden rules. And her main premise is this: the reason why relationships break down is because we're breaking each other's rules without realizing it. So I could go into a poor neighborhood and start talking a certain way, and I'd be breaking all their rules, and I could leave and think I helped them, and they're pissed off at me.
Yeah. And
the same goes for people who come from a poorer class walking into a wealthy environment, and then people are like, oh, geez, they don't even use the silverware properly, And so we have all these clashes of rules that are quite often hidden. And then I think it's just fascinating to think of the world that way, and why do people get offended? Why do people stop talking to me?
And maybe, and in some ways it's kind of fun because, we pulled off of talking about the gym, but hey, if you and I go to the gym, whether you're, top class and I'm the bottom class, and we line up on the deadlift bar,
it's the same weight.
We're all in the same class.
See, that's what I love about, working out is it's 45 pounds is 45 pounds.
Yeah.
There's no bonus help that you'll get to lift it off the rack. And so I do generally feel like the gym is one of the best places to hang out, to be, I'm glad I found it with my brothers, later on in life. And then obviously now meeting you and going to the gym, and really seeing a different, more committed version of it. Because we would just go to lift weight and just be like, oh man, how much did you lift?
Yeah.
But now it's how do you get my muscle connection?
Yeah.
How do you dial in your diet? What works for you? What kind of supplements are you having so that you can at least be awake while you're working out.
So that's an interesting, you pointed out a few interesting little subtopics in there, but
Yeah.
when you think back over the last, say, decade,
Yeah.
for you and being in the gym, what is the biggest, maybe one or two things that has really evolved for you in your lifting and working out?
Okay. So the first one, my muscle connection,
Yeah.
right? I think everyone's body mechanics are different. And in that, we can sometimes trick ourselves into thinking that we're stronger than we really are, or that even matters, right? And really all we're doing is wrecking our joints. And so as I've gotten a little bit older and I've started really honing in on doing the contractions slower, and really trying to feel that muscle connection, that's everything.
Yeah.
Everything else was me just wearing and tearing my joints away.
Yeah.
And so while it's fun to, squat 500 pounds or deadlift 600, like, you get to a point where you realize, for what? What am I doing this for? And I want to have, joints that work later on in life. I don't want to have to get a knee replacement. And so that was one big profound understanding that I got from some of these old videos, and even just working out with you, is like, you can go lighter and it can still feel heavy because your muscles don't care about anything but the contraction and intensity. They don't know how much weight it is. I don't dial in and go, hey, I'm about to lift 50 pounds now. All the muscle knows is like, what's the contraction?
Yep, that's right.
And so these weights are really just there to assist you in the contraction, period.
Yeah.
End of story.
Here's an interesting way of looking at the different categories of the gym. If you do CrossFit, CrossFit's about efficiency. It's about how quickly can you move one thing to a different space or area without burning up calories, so you move your body in a way to make that happen. So it's an efficiency.
Like endurance.
Yeah. And then when you do powerlifting's about, it's not about the contraction. It's about getting the weight from A to B. It doesn't matter how you do it.
Yep.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's pretty, doesn't matter. But bodybuilding is about making the exercise hard.
Right.
So whereas, you look at weightlifting, and weightlifting's about taking the same weight and making it easier so that you can lift more. But bodybuilding is about the complete opposite. And I think a lot of people mess that up when they go to the gym. They're still trying to lift these ridiculously heavy weights, but it's not doing well. Who knows what their goals are? We should never guess a person's goals, I suppose.
Sure. Yeah. And I think everybody's different in terms of why they're doing it. But I know me, when I would routinely lift over 315 pounds whenever we'd work out together. Right. And
in bicep
honestly,
curls.
What's that?
Bicep curls.
Yeah, it was just the normal thing. But when I would do it, honestly, part of me was just trying to feel alive. Like there was a part of that moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, I could die. This thing could fall on my neck. I started really enjoying that feeling because it was humbling. It was like all my focus had to come into play for that single moment. And just in life, with all the distraction and everything we're doing, you rarely get a chance to just zone in and just be very, very focused. And so I genuinely enjoy that moment. But then you start seeing how long term, I think of Ronnie Coleman a lot, and I'm like, oh man, they asked him, do you regret lifting 800 pounds, squatting that for, 2? And he's like, my only regret is that I didn't do 4. I'm like, man, you're crazy. But I don't want to have a spinal injury. So I do try to find that point where I'm still generally at the top of the gym, but I'm not going to kill myself.
Yeah, it's an interesting component, and you would probably.
There's going to be a lot of powerlifters be like, man, I can bench so much more than that. You're right. I'm just kidding. Relax.
But, what's interesting I'm sure for a lot of people is they've never really pushed themselves with weight.
Yeah.
And it's I know there's been a handful of occasions where mostly it's been deadlift, but I've got to a lift that I'm stressing so much metabolically that I pass out on the lift. That's a really interesting experience, and it really wakes you up to life.
Yeah.
Because it's
that's what I mean. It makes you feel alive. Like, man, I'm actually pushing the limits back to when, we used to be like this.
Yeah.
This kind of level of stress. We have a different kind of stress now, I think. Work stress. Yeah. These are just different kinds of things. This is a very primal stress I'm referring to.
Yeah.
I really like that feeling when my whole body is just pushing, and it's like every cell in my body has to work together.
And you're right there.
From the grip to the joints to the core flexing, like everything. You just got to pull it all together in this moment, and there's just nothing like it.
Yeah. Here's it's just kind of a side note juxtaposition of where, isn't it interesting?
These are big words, Craig.
Yes, I know. I just look them up and I write them down here. You can go into the gym, and you and I could go into the gym today, barring COVID, all things being equal, and we could load up a bar with 500 pounds, and we could walk it out and squat it possibly, or we could put 300 pounds above our face and bench press it. But they won't let me take my socks off or take my shoes off in the gym because it's unsafe.
Yeah.
But I'm allowed to put 300 pounds above my neck.
Well, maybe your shoes, but no, I agree with you. I think in this whole COVID thing, we have lost track of this whole concept of risk assessment.
Yeah.
Like, what is the real risk here? And this is where narratives again come into play, is that you can get people to believe or perceive that a risk is worse than it really is just by inflating the numbers or changing the way you present it. But when you really do the calculus on like the real risk in your life, you're more likely to die from a car accident, but we're driving all the time. Yeah. You know, and so we've lost control of this ability to just accurately assess risk, and it keeps us from doing a lot of good things.
This is where I'll lose people, but
just go, man.
You always hear like who's always that guy or gal who's like, oh, you gotta eat more hemp, and it's like, you look terrible.
Wait, what?
I'm not, someone will come up to you and be like, your big problem in life is you don't need enough hemp and you need more kale in your diet. It's like, you look terrible. You look like you just got hit by a bus and you haven't eaten in months. And it's funny because everyone always gets so on these weird trains of, you have to eat kale because the risk of not eating kale is so high.
Right.
It's like, you know what? I ate a McDonald's cheeseburger yesterday. So it's like,
and I'm still here. Yeah. No, I love those memes where you like see the picture of the lady who's 103 and she ate bacon every day.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
She looks great. And then the vegetarian or the vegan, it just looks like they're shriveled up.
I feel great.
Skeleton. But no, I agree. I think all of these extreme opinions kind of are formed out of this inability to be heard online. People are really trying to be heard out there, man.
What do you think about Diet Coke?
I think it's fine.
Yeah. I
like Coke Zero. I kind of got it from you. I'm like, well, if he can maintain that body fat percentage and basically drink 3, 4, 5, 6 a day. Yeah. I mean,
I rarely
but I changed the bubbly.
Oh,
I changed the bubbly. That's pretty good. Less sodium.
I rarely comment on things online because it usually gets me into trouble. And someone had posted something
but Craig, you're heading into a vintage, though.
I know.
Where it shouldn't matter.
It doesn't matter now. Yeah,
like,
the risk is
like
behind
you
me.
can. So all of my friends are in their 50s. I'm 37. I can't wait to be your age, Craig. I really can't.
But
why? No, I know, but the reason being is because like there's this archetype of a grumpy old man who just doesn't care anymore. I like that. I think I've been trying to adopt that earlier on in my life.
Yeah.
Because why do you have to listen to everybody?
Yeah.
like when everyone's so concerned, oh, you need to censor them online. You can shut off your computer. Yeah. Like, you don't even have to listen to anybody. And when you don't, they think you're weird, that you're not answering your phone, you're not responding to tweets and DMs and texts and everything. And I'm like, no, the grumpy old man got it right.
Yeah.
You just got to live your life and get ready to die.
Yeah.
And there was something pure and noble about that, where you didn't need to be. So this is another, and I'm sorry I keep dragging back to the boomer thing, but, we have to accept the fact that we need to pass something on to the next generation, right? And we need to let it go. This transition is going horrible. Yeah. like we have the oldest president in U.S. history fallen asleep in meetings with world leaders. This is not a good look, man. This is not a good look. Like, we need better leaders right now. And I think this gerontocracy that exists today needs to stop. I think they need to give up the positions and let younger people figure it out. And so the longer they stay, and I don't care whether it's at the level of the Walmart greeter or all the way up to the CEO or the president of the United States, it sounds harsh, but Eric Weinstein said it the best. We just need to let them die. It's so harsh. I get it. It's mean sounding. But it's not like they're giving up the reins to us and saying, yeah, you take it from here. This transition is going horrible, man.
I was talking to, I talked to a few of the mayoral candidates in Calgary, and I've talked to a few other politicians, and I'm like, why are you doing this? Why do you want this sort of heat in your life?
Yeah.
Like, move on. But, and I get, and most of them they have amazingly good hearts and they're compassionate and they want things to get better. And most of them kind of think that way. And that's like, why else would you do it? But then when you get to the level of the president or Trudeau, and it's like, you guys don't need these jobs.
No.
Trudeau does not need that job. He'd be fine. He should retire tomorrow. Like, why would he want that headache knowing that, whatever percentage of the people in Canada dislike him are going to be writing a mean. If I knew someone was writing a mean tweet about me today, I wouldn't even get out of bed. That's it. I would just stay in bed.
As you shouldn't. Who cares?
No, I know, but I don't know why these guys voluntarily throw themselves in the
I think
line
one
of
piece
fire.
of it is this. I think one reason why they continue to get up in the morning and try to change the world is because they now look back on their lives and realize they never really accomplished much. Because a lot of things were handed to them. So that's number one. They have this need to feel significant, and they're just not getting it from the world anymore. And so they want to hold on to that position as long as possible. They're sort of the elder statesmen of our generation. They're supposed to be there to advise, but they never stopped. They never got out of their productive years. It used to be Freedom 55. They're like 15 years late. Yeah. It's like, come on, guys. Like, give it up. Just let us lead at this point. And so that's one piece of it. But, another piece, I think, is that, they want to be heard and they want to be remembered. I think going back to
legacy
that book.
Building.
Legacy building. But again, they're doing a bad job of it, and the legacy they're leaving us is so bad. Instead of trying to fix it along the way, right at the last moment, they're just trying to speak their way into significance. Yeah. And so we have this, entire generation of leaders at the top of their game, or not the top of their game, but the top of the institutions that they run, just running them into the ground. And they, their ideas don't work. And they're unwilling to let the next generation, who they think are wild, unrefined, they don't understand what hard work is, that they're unwilling to give up the reins. Yeah. And I think this transition, again, not good.
Yeah, it's interesting, too, you see in politics where during a person's tenure, so, like maybe Trump or Biden or Obama, like you take any U.S. president. Yeah. When they're in power, it's like they could do nothing right. And everyone's complaining. And to me, I just don't get how Clinton gets away with what he did, and now he's one of the highest paid speakers that exists. Like, how does that happen? Yeah. It's shocking to me that the tolerance once you're out of office goes, it's infinite. When you're in office, it's zero. I don't get it.
Well, so here's another idea that I think fits into this. It's something called the youthification of society. Mm-hmm. So, women say, 40s is the new 30s type of thing. If you look at the numbers, the data, the number one demographic of selfie takers is actually women from ages 40 to 60. And so they're now watching the next generation. Yeah. If you look at them watch the next generation, they're trying to take what we're building and try to regain the relevance using it. And so they're actually trying to relive their youth a little bit using this new approach. And again, they're just trying to maintain some significance before they all pass on. And look, just as a final cap on that whole thing, I love my parents, I really do. I just think that the whole idea of their generation, they're not pondering what they actually did. And I think that's really dangerous moving forward, is to not accurately see the past. Mm-hmm. If you move forward with lies, you'll just have more lies moving forward. And so I think it is important to have this discussion. And it also happens at a family level, right? At the family level, you got the grandparents who are like, why are my kids not married with 10 children and have a house already? I was working out in the mines when I was 12 years old, walking to school upside down in the winter. Like, they're doing that thing right in the middle of their grandchildren's lives. Mm-hmm. They're trying to figure things out in real time because technology just makes life really hard to figure out because it changes so fast. And right in the middle, in their 30s, they're criticizing their children. And they're basically saying, you don't know what you're doing. It's like, whoa, why do you think people have midlife crisis? Yeah. And right on top of that, you're piling on it and saying, you should follow my advice. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons why it's happening, but ultimately, they're not going down peacefully.
No. No. But it's...
Man, I'm going to be in trouble after this.
You know, it's super evolving.
Yeah.
Like and that boomer crowd is vanishing, really. Like it's...
Yeah.
You know, it's the crowd just before me.
Right.
Really, and it's... Yeah, they're not going to live forever.
And that's the bright spot here, I think. I think they're facing this whole concept of death. It's coming for them. Death is the great equalizer. And I love reading books about, you know, sort of Stoic philosophy and everything, because I think society keeps forgetting that they're going to die, you know? And I know it's not a nice thing to think about for a lot of people, but once you embrace that fact, like, you can start living a better life. You can start finding more meaning in the little things that you do.
It was actually an interesting time of my life, because I've just gotten into my 50s. But it is interesting when you start to realize that there's less ahead of you than behind you. And, you know, the choices that you make now are more for your kids and for their future. Because, like, you know, and maybe a slight exaggeration, I look at it and think, I may never go to Italy. You know, and that's certainly in the cards now. Maybe I will, but it's entirely possible. 20 years ago, I would have told you, it's like, that's an absolute, I'm going to Italy at some point. But now it's like, you know.
And you look at the boomers, they can't stop going to Italy. They can't stop going on cruises. Like, everything is like, I got to get it in before I die. I think what you said is really significant, because that's the transition into the solution. It's just accepting that you may not get what you want. And that's okay. As long as you're setting up your children and the next generation for something better, you should be okay with that. And I just think that that's very wise, you know, considering all the things that you actually do, to actually start transitioning to that thought. Because eventually, you know, at the end of the day, and I always think about this, what really do we get when we die, right?
Yeah.
Other than a memory of ourselves. So you kind of have to live your life in a way to optimize for being remembered. Because that's all you're going to get. And if you look at, and, you know, even if you look at this from a purely like biblical perspective, you know, even God tries to be remembered. You know, the Pharaoh tried to be remembered. All they were trying to do is lock in their place in history as being worthy of being remembered by all of these people who would come after. And I think when you lose sight of that, you start living for some other thing, and you start making choices that make you not so fondly remembered. And that's where I think things fundamentally start to go wrong, because you can't just stick it to the next generation. You're just going to die, right? And so these kinds of ideas, like, when I listen to you say that, I get very excited. I'm like, good, you know, I won't go to Italy. That may not be in the cards for me, and I'm okay with that. You know, I may never go to Tahiti. I may never have a place in Hawaii. Okay. And, like, who cares?
So what?
So what?
You know, this is maybe an extraction of this as an interesting level. I was with a group of scouts one time. We were hiking, and it was a nasty uphill, seemed to go forever type hike. And there was this one kid that he was very happy and sitting home in front of his computer all day.
Right.
And he's like, why are we doing this? And I'm like, well, you're never going to see this lake unless we hike up here. And he goes, have you ever seen Google Maps? It's like, crap. You just took that away from me.
Well, you know, that brings up an interesting, you know, aside. I think my generation, the millennials, and maybe the ones after it, we're going to make our money from cryptocurrency. I really do believe that. I think we're going to switch, and then this $2 trillion industry is going to turn into a $20 trillion industry, and we're all going to be fine again. But my children are probably going to make their wealth in the metaverse, like the cloud, the video game world.
And at some point, cryptocurrency is going to stop being an industry, and it's just going to be a currency.
Correct.
Like, it doesn't always have to have this appreciating sort of component to it, where, you know, it just, why would you invest? Like, I'm not investing in money. I just use money. And that's maybe the direction that it goes.
Well, it's already going there. So America will have theirs out in 2022.
Okay.
Canada will have theirs out shortly after that. And when that digital dollar happens, look out for Bretton Woods 2.0.
Really?
They're going to make a global deal Okay, so this might sound like a conspiracy, but they're going to make a global deal like they did with Bretton Woods 1.0, and they're going to get all these countries to accept it as a reserve currency, hold it in their banks, and they're going to do a sweetheart deal and say, we can loan you unlimited money.
Right.
The same thing's going to happen over again. So, again, if you're holding cash, you're going to be in trouble because everyone's going to get a haircut all at once. You thought Cyprus was bad? Bretton Woods 2.0 is really going to blow your socks off.
I don't have any cash. It's all gone.
Then it's not a problem
Spent
for you,
it.
Craig. You know?
Spent it last week. Yeah, it's crazy. So, well, cool, man. Well, let's. You have other stuff to do today, probably.
Sure, maybe.
Want to hang out here all day?
Yeah. Okay. Let's just hang out. We'll go for lunch.
Fun. Well, I appreciate you coming. You have some great ideas. We're gonna do this again.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And we'll just tell jokes.
We'll do a live one in your gym, and just we'll talk about kind of like a Michael Hearn-esque type of thing.
I invented an exercise.
Oh,
You
really?
wanna know what it is? It's pretty cool, actually.
You're gonna have to
I
show
actually
me,
legit
man.
did.
Okay. Well, what
And
is
so,
it?
if I tell you about it, and
Okay, guys, this is
online,
breaking.
This
We have, for the first
earth-shattering.
time on the Craig Nadeau Experience, new
is it.
exercise go.
So, when you do a cable row, you're retracting your back.
Scapula.
You're retracting your scapula in, and that muscle is the rhomboid.
Okay.
What is the antagonist muscle to the rhomboid?
I don't know.
Your serratus. And every time you see someone posing and they have these unbelievable serratus, everyone's like, I wish I could get that. But what's the exercise for the serratus? Right, it's this motion. So the Craig press, which I've named
Craig press.
Craig press, is you lay down, and I've been using it on the Smith machine. It seems to control it well. You lock out your elbows in a very narrow grip, and you just retract and extend your shoulders up and down against weight, and that is your serratus muscle.
Wait, are you pulling or pushing?
Pushing up.
Pushing.
Yeah, so you're on the bench, and you're pushing with locked out arms, straight up, only using your serratus muscle, which is your shoulder joint coming forward.
Right.
It doesn't work your chest. It doesn't work your triceps. It's exclusively your serratus.
Serratus.
So that's the Craig press.
And it works? You can feel it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, I got to try this Craig press.
Yeah, well,
That's
and
incredible,
it'll be in
man.
the next video. All right. Well, thanks very much for your time.
Hey, man.
It's been
It's
great
been fun.
to see you, and we'll have some more fun again soon.
Sounds good.
All right. Take care.